Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki, Sharma, Upadhyay. Let's get started. What is it that comes to your mind when you hear climate change? Tornadoes, floods, wildfires, melting ice, doomsday predictions, summits that don't deliver anything, emission targets. All of this is linked to climate change, yes. But there's something else that most of us do not know about or do not acknowledge. Climate change is linked to conflict. Climate change is triggering conflict. Climate change is the biggest security threat of the future. This debate came up at the United Nations Security Council. Most countries backed the idea, including a proposal. 3 countries did not: Russia, China and India. On Gravitas tonight, we'll tell you why. We'll discuss how climate politics prevents countries from seeing what is becoming a clear and present danger. Also on the show tonight, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson faces a test for survival as his own party MPs shoot down his proposals to combat the Omicron surge. Is Russia going to deploy nuclear missiles in Europe? As the crisis with Ukraine worsens, Brussels has gone into a huddle to decode Moscow's endgame. China is cracking down on the MeToo movement after tennis star Peng Shuai disappeared. An Alibaba employee is fired after she accused her boss of rape. And are you as smart as a brain surgeon or a rocket scientist? A new study says you might be. You don't want to miss this story. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
Belarusian opposition leader Sergei Tikhanovsky sentenced to 18 years in jail for organizing mass unrest and inciting social hatred. He was jailed in 2020 as he prepared to run against Alexander Lukashenko in a presidential election. His wife, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, later ran in his place. A fuel truck explosion in the Haitian city of Cap Haitien kills around 50 people, says Prime Minister Ariel Henry. The Caribbean nation will observe 3 days of mourning for the deceased. The United States says it is preparing alternatives with allies in case talks on reviving the deal to curb Iran's nuclear ambitions fail.
We are actively engaging with allies and partners on alternatives.
Iran, meanwhile, had accused Western powers of a blame game over the nuclear deal. The United Nations says it has credible allegations of extrajudicial killings of more than 100 former Afghan national security forces and others, after the Taliban took over the nation in August, with most taking place at the hands of the ruling Taliban. The Pentagon says that no U.S. military personnel will be held accountable for the August drone strike in Kabul, Afghanistan, that killed 10 civilians, including 7 children. The military had previously called the strike a tragic mistake. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says that Washington will expand its military and economic relationships with allies in the Indo-Pacific over concerns of China's aggressive actions.
We're determined to ensure freedom of navigation in the South China Sea, where Beijing's aggressive actions there threaten the movement of more than $3 trillion worth of commerce every year.
Blinken made the remarks during a visit to Indonesia while describing the Indo-Pacific as the world's most dynamic region. The World Health Organization says the Omicron variant poses a very high global risk, with some evidence suggesting it evades vaccines. Meanwhile, Pfizer says that its antiviral COVID-19 pill is close to 90% effective in preventing hospitalizations and deaths, including against the new Omicron variant. Slow vaccination drives lead to massive vaccine wastage in African nations. At least 200,000 COVID-19 vaccines expired in Senegal without being used, while Nigeria is set to destroy 1 million expired COVID-19 vaccines. USA Gymnastics has ended a 5-year legal dispute with survivors of the Larry Nassar sexual abuse scandal by agreeing to a $380 million settlement. Hundreds of women had accused former team Dr. Nassar of sexual abuse, including Olympic champions Simone Biles, Ali Reisman, and Michaela Maroney. He was convicted on multiple counts in 2018 and sentenced to over 300 years in jail. Michigan State University, another former employer of Nassar, had previously agreed to a $500 million settlement. Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang has been removed as Arsenal captain after what the club has termed a disciplinary breach. Manager Mikel Arteta refused to divulge what the breach was, but reports suggest that Aubameyang, who is the club's highest-paid player, returned late from a sanctioned holiday. The striker was left out of last weekend's win against Southampton and has been dropped for the game against West Ham on Wednesday as well.
What do you think is the greatest challenge of this century? Not another war or another virus or a nuclear arms race. We're talking about an existential challenge. Our cover story tonight is about ice, a massive block of ice that can pose an international security threat. This block of ice is in Antarctica. It is as high as a 6-story building, as big as the American state of Florida. The world calls it the doomsday glacier. And this glacier is falling apart. In 5 years from now, this doomsday glacier will collapse. When that happens, it will unleash chaos. Entire coastlines will be rewritten. Large chunks of territory would disappear in 5 years, maybe sooner. This is no longer a projection. This is a clear and present danger. Climate change is a security threat, a threat that our leaders do not want to accept. On Gravitas tonight, we'll tell you all about it, the imminent climate doomsday and how we are not prepared for it. First, let's tell you about the source of the problem. It's this glacier in the Antarctic. It's called the Thwaites Glacier, but the world calls it the Doomsday Glacier. The reason is its size. It spans 120 kilometers. Thwaites is like a cork in the bottle. It protects all the glaciers in western Antarctica. So what happens when you lose the cork? A disaster of epic proportions will unfold. The entire western Antarctica would disappear, or should I say, is disappearing, because this disaster is already work in progress. Scientists have noticed new cracks on the Thwaites. The ice on the glacier rather, is eroding. New satellite images show several large diagonal cracks. Warm waters and increasing temperatures are making the ice melt. This glacier is no longer stable, and it's too late to try and save it. Experts now believe that the Thwaites will shatter in the next 3 to 5 years. The whole of western Antarctica will then be vulnerable. So what happens when all the ice melts? The global sea levels will rise by 3 meters. You heard that right. 3 meters. Do you know what that means? Major cities will go underwater like Miami. It will completely submerge underwater. So will southern Bangladesh and parts of the Netherlands and New York City. Here is what it might look like. What do you think will happen if we do nothing about all of this? Millions of lives and livelihoods will be destroyed. There will be mass displacement, social unrest. Such a massive climate event directly threatens the stability of nation states. And this disaster is coming whether we like it or not, whether we acknowledge it or not. Like I said, it's too late to save the glacier, but we do have time to prepare. We're not completely out of options. We can slow down the melting of ice. For that, we need to bring global warming under control by drastically cutting emissions. And that's where politics comes in. Politics, climate financing, blame games, hypocrisy, and summits and meetings that do not deliver. The latest one was at the United Nations. The UN Security Council discussed a resolution. The pitch was quite simple. Treat climate change as a global security threat. That's what the resolution proposed. It wanted member states to recognize climate change as a global security threat. It said climate change threatens world peace and it could trigger the next wave of global conflicts. So the Security Council must have more powers to deal with these new age threats. What kind of powers? The power to sanction countries for wide use of fossil fuels, the power to militarily intervene in conflicts caused by climate change. Well, these would have been significant. 12 out of 15 United Nations Security Council members backed this resolution. 12 out of 15. What about the remaining 3? Russia blocked it, India voted against it, and China abstained from voting. So India, Russia, and China did not back this resolution. But it's Russia's vote that killed the resolution, because Russia is a permanent member of the Security Council. It has the veto power. Well, China does too, but they abstained. Russia used this veto power to scuttle the resolution. Why did it do so? Moscow has given 2 reasons. 1, such powers would politicize the issue of climate change, and 2, they would empower the Western world to intervene in domestic issues of other countries, which are both fair points. What Moscow's statement did not say, though, was how Russia is benefiting from climate change. It is opening up new shipping routes for Russia in the Arctic, like this one. It's been called the Northern Sea Route. This could be Russia's very own Suez Canal. And here is why. This route dramatically cuts travel time from Asia to Europe. Right now, it takes 25 to 30 days for a ship to travel from Asia to Europe. If the Russian route opens up, the same trip will take around 18 days. All Russia needs right now is for the ice in the Arctic to melt. And that's just one part of the story. The other part is business. There is business opportunity for Russia in the Arctic, apart from the sea route. This region is a massive trove of petroleum and natural gas. It has deposits of minerals like iron ore, zinc, and lead. Even precious metals and minerals like gold, diamonds, and gemstones. Do you know what could be the total value of all of this? $35 trillion, according to one estimate. $35 trillion. When so much money is at stake, there is almost always a risk of conflict. And it won't be just limited to the Arctic. Climate change promises to upend our world in more ways than one. And that is bound to trigger conflict. Consider this study from 2015. The findings are very interesting. Here is what happens when temperatures go up by just 1 degree anywhere in the world. Interpersonal conflict goes up. Cases of assault and murder rise by 2.4%. What about conflict between groups like riots or a civil war? They go up by more than 11%. There is a clear scientific link between conflict and climate. But our world leaders are choosing to still ignore that threat because some of them see short-term gains and some others see climate change as another avenue for politics. Either way, it's a losing strategy, we say. Speaking about losing strategies, the Prime Minister of Britain is facing a rebellion, a revolt by members of his own party. They've decided to break ranks to oppose Boris Johnson's new COVID rules, new COVID measures. The rebellion could not have come at a worse time. A wave of scandals and setbacks has plagued 10 Downing Street. The Prime Minister is on a sticky wicket, taking what's being called a test for his survival. We'll discuss it in a bit. First, let's tell you about this Tory mutiny. At least 75 members of Boris Johnson's party, the Conservative Party, have decided to vote against his new COVID plan. It's a plan to impose strict measures to stop the Omicron variant from spreading further. The UK is bracing for what they're calling a tidal wave of Omicron. At least 250 people are in hospital with this variant, Omicron. 1 person has died, the first reported death ever due to the Omicron variant anywhere in the world. So the Prime Minister of Britain plans to reimpose a few restrictions. 1 is reintroducing work from home. 2, compulsory face masks in public places. 3, mandatory COVID passes for large venues. And 4, daily testing of people identified as a contact of any new cases. It sounds fair, even necessary given the surge and the UK's history. But some Conservative MPs say these steps are draconian and impractical. These MPs are against compulsory COVID passes or proofs of vaccination. They say such measures are not acceptable in a free society, that they deny unvaccinated people access to services and will be counterproductive in combating vaccine hesitancy. Some also say that Boris Johnson is whipping up this Omicron crisis to keep other political crises at bay. The British media says that around 75 Conservative MPs are set to revolt. 75. If these reports are true, then this would be the biggest revolt that the Boris Johnson government has ever faced. Bigger than the revolt by 55 Tories who voted against strengthening COVID restrictions in December last year. And like I said, the timing could not have been worse. It comes amid a tidal wave of setbacks and scandals for the Prime Minister. The first one is the Christmas party gate. Boris Johnson faces accusations of partying during last year's lockdown, of reveling after putting the rest of the country under restrictions, and then lying about it by denying that no such party took place. The Prime Minister confessed only when his former press secretary was caught on tape laughing and joking about a non-socially distanced wine and cheese party.
The Prime Minister, the government, spent the week telling the British public there was no party. All guidance was followed completely. Millions of people now think the Prime Minister was taking them for fools and that they were lied to. They're right, aren't they?
I apologise for the impression that has been given that staff in Downing Street take this less than seriously. I'm sickened myself and furious about that.
The second setback is the wallpaper gate. Boris Johnson has been accused of using party money to refurbish his apartment at 10 Downing Street. Last week, a report by the UK's Election Commission revealed that Boris Johnson lied about where that money came from and how much of it was spent on renovating his flat. The Conservative Party has been fined $23,000 for Boris Johnson's lies. The third controversy is regarding Afghanistan. A whistleblower from the UK's Foreign Office has raised this. Apparently, the Prime Minister personally intervened to enable an NGO to evacuate animals from Kabul at the expense of desperate Afghans. This controversial airlift is said to have been conducted on the orders of Boris Johnson. It has dented his credibility. He prioritized animals over humans.
Who authorised the prioritising of animals over people?
There was no prioritisation of animals over people.
Who took the decision then to evacuate animals over people?
There was no decision to evacuate animals over people.
How then did animals evacuate before some people?
So I'm not sure that's right in terms of timing. Nigel wanted to come in, but there was a charter flight arranged for animals. We helped enable that.
The fourth controversy revolves around allegations of sleaze. The Prime Minister reportedly tried protecting a Conservative MP who breached lobbying rules. The MP in question was Owen Paterson. He was accused of misusing his public office. He helped two private companies secure contracts. The Prime Minister has been accused of trying to hide his actions. When confronted in Parliament, Boris Johnson shot himself in the foot by accusing Labour MPs of doing the same. Listen to this.
But what I think everybody can see, Mr. Speaker, is that in a classic, lawyerly way, the right honourable gentleman is now trying to prosecute others for exactly the course of action that he took himself. What I think the nation wants to know, because his register is incomplete, who paid Mishcon Derea and who paid the 25,000? Who's paying him for his...
Now, all these controversies, the Christmas party, the wallpaper, the Kabul evacuation, the sleaze row, they've all led to a collapse of trust in Boris Johnson. And I'm not the one saying this. Surveys are. According to a recent poll, Boris Johnson's approval ratings have dropped to an all-time low. 64% of British citizens have an unfavourable opinion of their Prime Minister. This is the lowest level on record.
Arrest Boris Johnson! 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 Arrest Boris
Well, there was a time when Boris Johnson was seen as an electoral wizard, a politician with an uncanny talent of winning over people against all odds. Today, his political star is dimming. His MPs are revolting, his approval ratings are sinking, and his troubles are multiplying by the day. This is perhaps Boris Johnson's biggest test of survival. And it's tough to say if he'll sail through this time. Now, 1 year, 7 months, and 6 days. Do you know what this time frame stands for? 1 year, 7 months, 6 days. The India-China border standoff. It began in May last year, and it's still going on. More than 580 days later, there is still no agreement at the line of actual control. What is India's plan here? Is there a long-term strategy to contain China? We were told, yes, there is. It started with a ban on Chinese apps. Your PUBG, TikTok, WeChat, everything was removed from the Indian market. Step 2, we were told, was decoupling, keeping Chinese investments away, dropping Chinese sponsors from Indian events, like the Indian Premier League in 2020. Chinese phone maker Vivo was supposed to be the title sponsor, but they pulled out at the last minute. Do you know why? Because of public discontent. 1 year later, the Chinese are back, not as a sponsor, but a partner. I'm sure you've heard about Oppo phones. They have signed a Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, with the Indian Space Agency, ISRO. What is this deal about? Oppo and ISRO will work together on the Navik messaging service. Now, some quick facts about Navik. Think of it as India's homegrown GPS. It gives you real-time location and timing. Navik covers the entire Indian mainland, plus 1,500 kilometers beyond it. How does Oppo come into this picture? Well, it's basically a collaboration. ISRO will share Navik's technical data with Oppo. Together, they will build a ready-to-use Navik messaging service. Now, when I say messaging service, it doesn't mean WhatsApp or Telegram. This is much more basic, like sending an SOS from remote locations or pinging your location at sea, things like that. This Navik messaging system will be built into Oppo phones in India. That is the plan. Just 2 problems. Number 1, will this user data be harvested by Beijing? It's a real possibility. We know that the Chinese government arm twists tech giants. Also, Chinese companies are bound by law to share data with Beijing. Problem number 2, what happened to decoupling from China? ISRO is India's flagship agency. It operates under the Indian government's Department of Space. So what message does this agreement send? And by the way, this is not a one-off. ISRO has also signed a deal with Xiaomi, another Chinese phone maker. It was the same agreement to share Navik technology with Xiaomi phones. Safe to say that decoupling is not going to plan. Banning Chinese apps was a good move. It cut off Chinese companies from the lucrative Indian market. But the follow-up must be better. Take bilateral trade, for instance. Amid all the boycott calls, India-China trade is growing faster than ever. This year, it topped $100 billion for the first time, $78 billion in Chinese exports and $23 billion in Indian exports. Now, if you compare these numbers to the same time last year, it's a 22% rise. And remember the context of this rise, a pandemic and a border standoff. So how would you describe this equation? Diplomatically, things are frosty. Militarily, it's a face-off, but financially, it's a bonanza, a bustling bilateral trade relationship. In fact, every country is facing this problem. They hate China, but they buy from China. Take the United States, for instance. This year, Chinese exports to the US touched $408 billion. That's a 17% rise over last year. And don't forget, this is during a trade war. On paper, China and the US are still fighting a trade war, but bilateral trade continues to grow. Is there any logic to this? Well, yes, there is. China has embedded itself into the global supply chain. Your mobiles, your televisions, your kids' toys, everything is linked to China. As one American business executive said, we spent 13 years getting into China. It's impossible for us to just pull out. Well, the same applies to India. I wouldn't say it's impossible, but it's definitely going to take time, and we get that. We're talking about cultivating new supply chains, about finding new suppliers, building new factories, and all of this does take time, yes. But here's what India can do in the time being. Cut China off from government contracts. Narvik is certainly a big-ticket project. But does it need a Chinese partner? Are other phone makers not capable of this joint project? I'm sure they are. This deal may not generate money for Oppo. It may not increase their sales, but it does increase their prestige. And it sends the wrong message to the people of India. And talking about wrong messaging, Russia is escalating tensions with Europe. After sending 100,000 troops to the Ukraine border, Moscow has issued a new threat. It believes that NATO could ramp up its deployments in Ukraine, so Russia has threatened to respond with nuclear missiles. Is Vladimir Putin pushing the world towards the brink of a nuclear war? Our next report brings you the latest.
Russia is playing a dangerous game in Europe. It has raised tensions with a massive buildup in Ukraine. Now it is threatening the Europeans with nuclear weapons. A senior Russian diplomat has issued a warning. He says Russia could deploy intermediate-range nuclear missiles against Europe. Moscow believes NATO wants to deploy its own missiles to target Russia, so it feels the need to respond. Europe is taking the Russian threat seriously. On Monday, the European Union went into a huddle. The bloc is mulling a fresh round of sanctions against Russia. Europe's top diplomat is determined to send a strong message to Moscow.
We are on the turn mode, on the dissuasion mode, in order to the crisis to start. But in any case, we will send a clear signal that any aggression against Ukraine will have a high cost for Russia if this happens. But now we are trying to do our best in order to prevent this from happening.
US President Biden backs more sanctions against Russia. He spoke to the Russian president last week. Washington too remains committed to supporting Ukraine. But Biden has refused to send American troops if a war does break out. The American president believes he can rein in Putin without boots on the ground.
Here's the deal. I've made it absolutely clear to President Putin, it's the last thing I'll say, that if he moves on Ukraine, the economic consequences for his economy are going to be devastating. Devastating.
The West hasn't hesitated from using strong language against Russia. So far, their strategy is proving to be ineffective. After his call with Biden, Putin deployed more troops near the Ukrainian border. Russia is raising the stakes on the ground. Reports say 100,000 Russian troops are now stationed near the Ukrainian border. 1,000 soldiers recently conducted a drill there. These Russian soldiers were firing bullets just 50 kilometers away from the border. On the other side of the fence, the Ukrainian soldiers have lost faith in the diplomats. They believe they need to be prepared for a conflict.
In general, you should only talk to Putin with weapons. He only understands the language of guns. But I will say it again. Any diplomatic negotiations, if they lead to a peaceful solution to this conflict without losing their territories, I always agree to them.
The war has been going on for 8 years. For 8 years, there have been many of these negotiations. And roughly speaking, if we look at 2014 to 2015, nothing has changed basically. Yes, there are fewer shells in some places, but people are still dying, and there are still problems at the front.
The West hoped sanctions would tame Moscow's aggression, but they have failed to deliver. Russian President Vladimir Putin has now called for a dialogue with NATO and the United States. The world is closely watching if these crucial talks can restore peace in Europe. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
From Russia, we turn to China, where the MeToo movement is still under attack. Women are being silenced for sharing stories of sexual harassment. Some have disappeared, some have been detained, and some are being dismissed. The latest victim is an Alibaba employee. We don't know what she looks like or what her full name is or how old she is. All we know is that she has been fired, dismissed for accusing her colleague of rape. Media reports refer to her as Zoo. It's a surname, they say, that is being used in court. But given the state of secrecy in China, it's very hard to verify that's really her last name. What we can confirm for you, though, is that she's been accused of spreading falsehoods, of smearing the name of her male superior, her boss. She's accused him of rape. This was in the month of August, more than 3 months ago. This woman told her company that her manager had raped her. She said that this happened after a drunken night at an office dinner. The company, Alibaba, paid no heed to her complaint, so she took matters into her own hands. She wrote a lengthy letter about the assault. She published it on Alibaba's internal system. The letter went viral on Chinese social media. It sparked outrage across the country. That's when Alibaba began feeling immense public pressure. They finally had to do something, or at least appear to be doing something. So they began issuing statements. They started talking about zero tolerance on sexual assault. They promised to deal with this case as per the law. In fact, Alibaba CEO Daniel Zhang even went to the extent of saying that he was shocked, furious and ashamed about what had happened. He promised to punish the culprits. But this was all an act. Once the public pressure let up, guess what the company did? They fired her. Alibaba fired the woman who accused her boss of rape. On your screen is the dismissal notice they issued. They've accused the woman of spreading false information. They've accused her of ruining her employer's reputation. The letter says there are inconsistencies in her claims. On what basis are they saying this? On the basis of a court ruling that came in late August. That's when Chinese prosecutors dismissed the case. They said the behavior of the accused did not constitute a criminal offense. And listen to this, it was not a criminal offense. They called it a matter of, quote-unquote, forcible indecency, whatever that means. The court said this offense carries a maximum penalty of 15 days in detention. In other words, the court said this is not rape, this is not criminal, this is forcible indecency. What is that even supposed to mean? The Merriam-Webster dictionary defines it as molestation or humiliation of a victim either by violence or through coercion, and that according to a Chinese court is not a criminal offense and requires just 15 days of detention. What's worse, the victim loses her job and is labelled inconsistent. And this is not even the worst of it. This woman has just lost her job. There's another, more prominent name who's lost her voice, who's been made to disappear because she accused a former vice premier of sexual assault. A certain Peng Shuai, whose safety nobody has been able to confirm. This is the fate of women in China in particular and the world in general. They're targeted for speaking about harassment and sexual intimidation. In China, it's brazen. It's almost like China has declared a war on the MeToo movement, from Peng Shuai to Huang Shuqin, to Wang Jianbin, to Luo Shishi, Liang Xiaowen, Zhu Xiaoshuan. Almost every Chinese woman who dared to come forward and share her MeToo story has either been smeared, silenced, or shunted out of public view. Even discussions about these cases are censored. Their stories are discredited as anti-China plots, fabrications by China's enemies. The accusers are labelled as tools of foreign powers. It doesn't matter if they're famous or obscure. They're all subjected to the same kind of humiliation, which only goes on to show how threatened China feels by the MeToo movement, how threatened the CCP feels by women who dare to speak up. It's a story we'll keep tracking. Now we're into the business end of December, which means it's time to look back at the past year, 2021. It was definitely an eventful year. We had a new US president. We had the biggest vaccine drive in history. We had a major climate conference. We also had some big tragedies like the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan, the war in Ethiopia, or the coup in Myanmar. So many events and so many people who shaped these events. So here's a tough question for you. Who do you think is Person of the Year? Who stood out in 2021? Who made you sit up and be inspired? You can take your time. Meanwhile, let me tell you what the Time magazine thinks. They always announce a Person of the Year, and this time it's Elon Musk, billionaire, space entrepreneur, and serial tweeter. What exactly did Elon Musk do this year? Well, he launched a couple of rockets. He toyed with the stock market and he tweeted a lot. The Time magazine says Elon Musk is saving the Earth, that he's taking humans to our new home, which is Mars. Well, maybe he is, but was 2021 the year of Elon Musk? Will this year be remembered for his childish Twitter rants? I, for one, don't think so. Because while Time was swooning over Tesla and SpaceX, the rest of the world was slightly distracted. Something about a pandemic and the death of thousands of people. I'm not saying that Elon Musk is undeserving. His vision is certainly inspiring, but there is a time and place for his vision, and 2021 was neither the time nor the place. So who should be Person of the Year instead? According to you. There were so many deserving candidates, like the people of Myanmar. After the military coup in February, they hit the streets, they braved bullets, they shrugged off threats from the army, all for democracy. And how can you forget the women of Afghanistan? As superpowers fled, they stood firm. They fought to preserve their hard-earned freedoms. Imagine the courage. The same Taliban once shut them in their homes. They were publicly flogged. They were denied jobs and education, but none of it deterred these women. They marched on the streets, fearless and spirited. If world leaders shared their courage, Afghanistan would still be a democracy today. And the list doesn't end there. You had tennis player Naomi Osaka, gymnast Simone Biles. Thanks to them, the world is still talking about mental health. All of them are deserving winners, we say. But for us, this year, 2021, has been about one thing: recovering from the pandemic, ending lockdowns and resuming our normal lives. To some extent, we have been able to do that, which is why our Person of the Year are vaccinators. The millions of health workers who spent the last year immunizing us, their dedication and hard work was unparalleled. The politicians announced big targets, but it was these vaccinators who achieved them. They worked multiple shifts. They traveled to remote locations. They made us feel safe and comfortable taking our vaccines. I can give you examples from India. Take a look at these vaccinators. They're trekking through mountains. They're crossing rivers. Where exactly are they going? To remote settlements in Jammu and Kashmir. We're talking about a few dozen people, 100 at most. They may not be willing to take vaccines. They may be hostile to these vaccinators. But these young medics never give up. As we keep saying, nobody is safe until everybody is safe. I'm sure vaccinators across the world have similar stories. Maybe they spent less time at home. Maybe they sacrificed their holidays to protect us. Sounds like something a Person of the Year would do. For most of us, getting a vaccine, was not such a big deal. We had the means, we had the access. But think about places like Yemen or Sub-Saharan Africa. In places like that, the vaccine must come to you. You cannot go to the vaccine. And that's what vaccinators did. They marched through war zones to inoculate people. 2021 was a year of sacrifice for them. The question is, how can we repay them? For starters, fight vaccine hesitancy. Do your research and get that shot. And secondly, wear your mask. Don't let this virus mutate and spread, because if it does, we will need more boosters. And more boosters means more work for vaccinators. Well, you may or may not agree with our pick for Person of the Year, but our logic is quite simple. You don't need to dream of Mars to make a difference on Earth. You don't need to always launch satellites or play with the stock market. Sometimes a 5-second injection is much more important. And before ending the show, I have one more question for you. Sorry for the 9 p.m. interrogation, but I promise this question is also interesting. Are you as smart as a brain surgeon or a rocket scientist? I know you're thinking, no way. Those are top-of-the-line professionals. They operate on our brain. They send rockets to the moon. Surely they're a special lot. Well, think again. A new study has found that brain surgeons and rocket scientists are just like us. The study says they're not smarter than us. They're not more special. They're just good at what they do. So what exactly is this study? Let me explain. Researchers collected data from 329 aerospace engineers and 72 neurosurgeons. What was in the data? An online test. It's called the GBIT, the Great British Intelligence Test. It gives you a full workup Your planning ability, your cognition, your memory, your reasoning, everything is tested. 18,000 random British citizens also took the same test. The rest was simple. Just compare the results. Let me tell you what the researchers found. When each group scores was compared to those in the general population, only two differences were significant. The neurosurgeons' problem, their problem-solving speed was quicker, and their memory recall speed was slower. Everything else was the same. Reasoning, attention, cognition. There was nothing to separate brain surgeons and rocket scientists from the general public. And by the way, the quicker problem-solving speed can be explained. Neurosurgery is fast-paced. The surgeons must react in seconds, so naturally they're faster at solving problems. And that's what the study found. What else did the study find? That horses are meant for courses. Let me elaborate. Space engineers were better at mental manipulation, like rotating objects inside your head. Expected for people who work with numbers and shapes. Meanwhile, the surgeons were better at semantic problems, like defining rare words. Again, expected, since medical terminology uses Greek and Latin. So what's the big takeaway here? Big brains is a big lie. Brain surgeons and rocket scientists are not extra special. According to this study, at least, they're just good at what they do, like a lot of us are. If you're a surgeon, if you ask a surgeon to manage a football team, will they succeed? Or if you ask a scientist to fix your plumbing, will they figure it out? Chances are they won't. Society creates these ideas of intelligence. A rocket scientist is brilliant, an electrician is not. This study proves that those notions may be wrong. We're all equally smart. The difference is some of us are good at neurosurgery. Some are good with words. Others have a knack for sports. Here's how the study's authors put it. It is not that they're better at everything, but they're better at certain things that make them good at what they do. In other words, if you have good hand-eye coordination, you can perhaps be a better cricketer. If you have good reaction skills, you can become a surgeon. If you have a vivid imagination, you can become an artist, if you have the skills that go with it. So to answer my first question, are you as good as a brain surgeon? At brain surgery, no. But in all other things, perhaps yes. The key to finding out your skill set and then working hard towards achieving that is the key. That's something that you will find in all brain surgeons and rocket scientists. They're skilled, yes, but they're also extremely hardworking. That hard work separates them from the others because flair can only get you so far. It can make you a rocket scientist, but it cannot make you a great rocket scientist. Think about it. With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you with Gravitas images. Thanks for watching.